warm good morning to all. Most respected dignitary and the dais, dear colleagues, research scholars, students, wishes, and all other participants in this Meet a Scholar program that we have been organizing here today. Thank you all for coming over here and joining us this morning. Today is a very memorable day for all of us. An erudite scholar and social scientist is with us. It's my privilege to have been asked to welcome our most respected chief guest and other participants in the name of the Fraternity of History, University of Kerala. We are fortunate in getting the most deserving person to interact with our students and researchers. It's none other than Lennart Bes, an Indologist and historian studying political culture in modern, pre-modern India. He published many works about South India in the medieval and early medieval kingdoms and the rich sources in South India, South Asia. And he has been teaching history in many universities. Dutch overseas history has been doing archival studies at Leiden University, University of Tokyo, and universities, several other universities has been teaching for the way long. He is presenting a research paper on the courts of 17th and 18th century Kerala. Now he is doing on that, and his title of presentation here will be the Dutch sources on South India, structure, contents and context. So he's a very nice person from my experience, and I didn't have such kind of acquaintance with him before. But starting our talking from this day morning onwards, it's been very friendly, very nice. So we need to emulate such kind of personalities. So you will also experience the way in which he will interact. I'm not saying anything more about that. Sir, we are so much obliged to you for your magnanimity in accepting our invitation and reaching here on time in spite of the busy schedules. Dear fellow members, please join me in giving our chief guest Lennart Bes the best cordial welcome. Welcome you, sir. So looking around, I could see many familiar faces. Our research scholars are here, our students of post-graduation are there, and scholars from other departments are also here. It's very nice to see you all, and I am extremely thankful to all of you for this gathering. And on behalf of the Department of History, I welcome you all once again. Thank you very much. I invite our chief guest to start his presentations and have interactions with our students. Yeah. Thank you very
much. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Shaji, for this very nice introduction. I'm happy that even from only half an hour in the car together, you think I'm such a nice person. That's good. I'm very honored, I really mean that, to be here in Kerala, in Tiruvananthapuram at the University of Kerala to give a presentation. It's really special for me because I just started working on Kerala history myself. I still don't know that much about it because it's really complicated with all these 50 kingdoms and princes in the 17th and 18th century. But so yeah, it's a special moment for me to be here. So thanks to the University of Kerala, thanks to Professor Shaji, thanks to Professor Janeshwaran, I hope I pronounce his name more or less correctly, who I first got in touch with 6 years ago when I was here for the Indian History Congress. I organized the Dutch Sources panel at that time. I think there were only 15 people interested, so it was not such a big success. So it's good to see many more people today listening to my story about the Dutch sources. on Kerala. Okay, let me first briefly introduce myself again. So my name is Lennart Bes. I'm from the Netherlands, so I'm Dutch. So that's why I work with the Dutch sources. I studied what we call Indology. It's some kind of India studies, South Asia studies in Leiden University in the Netherlands. And I focused on history. Then I found a job at the National Archives of the Netherlands, where we have lots of Dutch East India Company records. So I worked there for a long time, but I missed academia. So when I had the opportunity to do a PhD, I left the National Archives, and maybe I should stand here because then you can see it. Then I did my PhD, and then I found a job at Leiden University, and I've been teaching there now for about 8 years. Asian history, especially Indian history, and also, maybe we should wait till the light. This is the difficult one to get. Yes, okay. So Asian history, Indian history, and also Dutch colonial history. I have to again emphasize, I only recently started working on Kerala history, only a few months ago, because before that I worked on the Nayakas of South India. So that is mostly Tamil Nadu history and Karnataka history. Okay, what will I do today? I have one big purpose, and that is to show you the importance of the Dutch records, the Dutch East India Company records, for Kerala's history in the 17th and 18th century. So I want to show you the richness of the records, the importance of the records, and mainly my purpose is that after this talk you are all so enthusiastic that you want to learn Dutch straight away and you want to work with the Dutch sources. So let's see if I succeed. My talk will have 3 parts. First I will talk about the structure of the Dutch sources, then I will talk about the contents, and then I will talk about context. So what I will do first is talk about the various archives, various collections of the Dutch East India Company that are still in India and that are in the Netherlands. Then I will talk about the different kinds of documents you can find in these Dutch archives and what kind of information they actually contain about Kerala. And then last, to give some context, I will compare the information in the Dutch records with information in Indian sources. So what happens actually if you put them together? Well, because I only recently started working in Kerala, my comparison between Indian sources and Dutch sources will not be about Kerala, but will be about the Nayaka states. But it doesn't matter. You know that you can learn the same lesson from that comparison. Okay, another thing I would like to stress, I'm going to tell you lots of things. Maybe I go a bit too fast, maybe it's complicated. If you don't understand it, you can just raise your hand and ask me. I don't mind. You can interrupt me. It means that you are thinking about what I'm saying, and it means you have questions. So don't worry. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Also, if you don't understand my English, because I speak with a Dutch accent, you can say, hello, sorry, I don't know what you're saying. Can you repeat? No problem. Okay. Well, let me first very briefly tell you something about the Dutch in India and especially Kerala. Well, here you see a picture of a coin, and it has a V, O, and a C. It's a Dutch abbreviation. It means Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. That is Dutch for United East India Company. It was united because first you had lots of small companies. They went together. They became the VOC, or Dutch East India Company. So if I use the word VOC today, it just means the Dutch East India Company. Well, of course, the Dutch were in India to make money. Still, the Dutch, they just want to make money at that time, also today. So that's why I put the coin here. The N is of Nagapatnam, because that was one of the places where the Dutch were also based in Tamil Nadu. So this represents the commercial side, of course. There was always trade. But when you go somewhere to do trade, you somehow have to enter into political relations with the local authorities, right? And that can be you ask for permission, or it can be you just go to the place, you kill everyone, and then you can do the trade yourself. That is all politics. So that's why you have a big gun here, again with VOC, because of course the contacts were often violent. So this shows the political side. And of course, if you have trade and you have political relations, there's also cultural exchange, right? So that's why you see this Indian painting on cloth. Yeah, it's a cultural representation of the cultural context. Okay. Where was the VOC in India? Actually, it was all over the place. There were 5 main administrative areas where the Dutch were concentrated. It doesn't mean that they controlled large territories. Basically, the Dutch didn't have any territory in India. It means that this was an area where they were very active. So VOC regions, the Dutch word is kantoor or kantoren, it means administrative unit, in South Asia. So they were in Surat, that was one of their kantoren. They were in Bengal. Here they were not powerful at all, because this was of course the Mughal Empire, right? So the Mughal emperors were just tolerating the Dutch, not more than that. They were in Coromandel, so India's east coast. Here they had concluded many treaties with the local rulers, the Nayakas. They were in Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka. It is relevant because a little part of South India administratively also came under the kantoor Ceylon. And of course they were in Malabar. That's how the Dutch called Kerala. They always call it Malabar, the Malabar kantoor. So these were the 5 main areas. If you look at all the individual settlements, the factories, this is the picture. So all these black flags and a few green ones, these were all places in South Asia where the Dutch were based. And you see that there is a concentration, especially in South India. And so their presence was much more intensive in South India. Now, why were the Dutch in India? Well, very basically, to buy textiles, any kind of cloth. Why? Because in Southeast Asia, especially what we now call Indonesia, the people were very interested in Indian textiles. So the Dutch brought it there, and in return, they got spices. And the spices were very popular in Europe. And so India was sort of a place to get something that you could exchange for stuff in Southeast Asia that you could bring to the Netherlands. Malabar was an exception because there the most important product was pepper, which you could also bring to the Netherlands because pepper was also very popular in Europe. And so Malabar was something of an exception in that sense. I should also say, as you can already see, that Malabar, Kerala, was the place in India where the Dutch were most active and their presence was most intensive. And it was also the place where the Dutch really had some sort of political and economic power. Maybe a little bit colonial. You cannot say that in the other areas the Dutch were colonial power. They were basically merchant and mercantile power. In the Dutch it was slightly different, in Kerala. So maybe I should feel a little bit ashamed that my ancestors in Kerala sometimes were a bit colonial, but it's also good because it means there are lots of Dutch sources now. And so in a way, maybe we should also be a bit happy. Okay, here you see 3 maps of Kerala. Kerala or Malabar as it's called. And what do you see? VOC settlements, so Dutch East India Company settlements. And the local kingdoms. So here again you see a map. All these yellow-green balls is where the Dutch had factories, trading stations. Yeah, so quite a lot all over Kerala state. Here you see a Dutch map of that time. I don't know if it's very clear, but you see they mention all these places on the coast showing the importance of those settlements for the Dutch. And here you see another map where I sort of combine this because you see lots of names. I hope you can read it. You see several circles. Some are white, some are black. The black circles is where the Dutch really had a trading station. And we also include all the names of the various kingdoms that they were in touch with. And you can already see lots of kingdoms that the Dutch were connected with. But I'll tell you more about that later. Okay, let me give you a very brief history of the Dutch in Kerala, very quickly. I don't know how familiar this is to you, I don't know how much you know about it, but just very briefly. Okay, the Dutch arrived in India basically around the year 1600, but in Kerala they arrived a bit later. Initially they were not so interested in Kerala, also because the Portuguese were there, right? So the Portuguese wouldn't allow the Dutch to stay there. So there were some contacts with Calicut, or I should say Calicut, but I find it really difficult to pronounce. So if you don't mind, I will say Calicut. And also with Kayamkulam, one of the little kingdoms. But this was nothing really serious or permanent. But then, in the late 1650s, the Dutch had conquered parts of Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and kicked out the Portuguese. And then they thought, now we have Ceylon, we are making a lot of money there from the cinnamon, but the Portuguese are still there. And they are quite close to us, and we don't like it. So finally, maybe we should decide to get the Portuguese out. So places like Kranganur, Kollam, Kochi were all attacked, and after some years, finally the Dutch managed to get the Portuguese out. And then they thought, okay, now we have to stay in Kerala, in these coastal ports, to protect our trade in Ceylon. So that was actually the reason why they first came to Kerala, a strategic region. Then they also found out, lots of pepper here, you can sell it with a lot of profit in Europe, so let's also do the pepper trade. So then they started establishing all these factories and became more and more involved. And especially, well, they were active and maintaining settlements all the way from Kannur down south to, I think it's called Tengapatnam. It's a place in Travancore. So this whole area, the Dutch were active. But most activities were actually between Kranganur, you call it Korunganur, very difficult to do, something like that. But at that time the Dutch also found it really difficult, so that's why they changed all the names to make it a bit easier. But basically between this area and Kollam, that's where they were most active, but also quite active in other areas. And the headquarters of all these activities, so of the Malabar Kantor, the Malabar establishment, was Kochi. The Dutch call it Kochi. So here you see a picture from a book by Baldeus. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The Dutch name, this is the Dutch name. It means something like very precise description of Malabar. By this guy, he was a Dutch pastor. He published a book in Amsterdam in 1672. And there is this picture by this Dutch commander, Rijklof van Goens. He was the guy who kicked out the Portuguese from Cochin and then took over that town. He was a very aggressive guy. He wanted to conquer the whole of South India. But then his bosses said, no, it will cost too much money, so let's just keep a few factories. So here's this picture. Of course, this picture is not very accurate because it was made by a Dutch artist in Amsterdam who never ever went to India. So just from his imagination, he would draw this picture. But okay, still interesting. So here you see a Dutch drawing, a bird's eye view drawing of Kochi. This is a little bit more accurate. It's a drawing that's still kept in the Netherlands National Archives from the 60s, and it shows you what Fort Kochi at that time looked. So it's sort of almost like a Dutch town in Kerala. Although, of course, many of the inhabitants were actually not Dutch, but from Kerala itself. And Kochi was the headquarters of that area. Well, the Kochi kingdom became the Dutch protectorate. It was, I think, the only kingdom in Kerala where the Dutch were really powerful and actually controlling, well, at least trying to control everything. Here you also see a picture, a depiction of the king of Kochi from the late 16th century, so it's very early, by this guy Jan Huyghen van Linschoten in his book Itinerario. And this is supposed to be the king of Kochi. I don't know if this is a very good representation. Again, the guy who made this drawing probably never visited India. The elephant also looks a bit funny, not so accurate. So this also tells you that much of the information is actually not so reliable or orientalist. Anyway, what I should stress again is that VOC had very little territory in Kerala. And there were some lands that they were controlling, but basically they were just trading. But through the trade and through threatening with violence, they actually had a lot of control. So here, this picture is from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. That's our national museum. You see two soldiers, local soldiers from Kerala, serving the VOC, serving the Dutch East India Company. So this picture is to show you that, yeah, the Dutch didn't control territory, but still had a lot of military and economic power. And it was quite easy for the Dutch to control Kerala because there were no really big, large kingdoms like the Mughals or the Bijapur Sultanate, right? All quite small kingdoms. So it was easy for the Dutch. Another reason is all these kingdoms were fighting each other, right? For instance, Calicut and Kochi, always in competition. So they both tried to get the Dutch to their side. And so the Dutch were almost automatically absorbed in the local politics. And that's also how they got their power. Still, the Dutch had concluded all these treaties with these local parties, with all these kingdoms, and the idea was that the Dutch had a monopoly, so they would be the only ones that would be allowed to buy pepper. But that was the contract, that was the treaty. It didn't work like that in reality. So all these kings, they just signed a contract, and then they thought, bye Dutch, we're also gonna sell our pepper to other parties, local traders, to the British, to the French, to all kinds of traders. So the monopoly didn't work very well. That is all politics, that is all commerce. I told you there was also a lot of more cultural, scientific exchange. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Hortus Indicus Malabaricus. Who knows the Hortus? Who knows it? You can raise your hand. A few people. Yeah, don't be shy. Put your hand in the air if you know. Okay, so this is an example of the fact that some Dutchmen were also really interested in the local culture, the local situation. So you always call this man Van Riet because you pronounce it in the English way, but actually in Dutch his name is Van Rede. So I will say Van Rede, but then you can think, oh, that is Van Riet. And he worked together with various local assistants, so people from Kerala who really knew a lot about the local plants and trees and animals, etc. And he published this 12-volume work, Hortus Indicus Malabaricus. It means the Indian Malabar garden. 12 volumes full with drawings and the names in different languages of all these plants. And they told me it's still the most important work for Malabar plants today. Well, I don't know if that's true, but okay, an example of cultural exchange. Okay, so all this Dutch economic and political power came to an end in 1741. I guess you're familiar with that because Travancore was growing and growing under this new ruler, Martanda Varma, who centralized the kingdom. And he thought, oh, these annoying Dutch, let's get rid of them. So there was a big war in 1741, I think at Gadjah, and the Dutch were defeated. And the Dutch stayed, but they no longer had strong political power or economic power. So I don't know if you're familiar with this image. I think it's in the Padmanabhapuram Palace, but I'm not sure. And what do you see here? Martanda Varma. Martanda Varma. How do you say it? Yeah, you all say it. Only you. Martanda Varma. So Martanda, not Martanda. Martanda. In the Netherlands we all say Martanda Varma. Martanda Varma is here. This is the commander of the Dutch troops, Eustachius de Lannoy. I think you naturally say the Lannoy because it's a French name. And he surrendered to Travancore, and then actually he also went to Travancore. I think you all know it, and he became one of the commanders of the Travancore army and actually reorganized it. Yeah. Okay, and then in the 1790s the British came and the Dutch were kicked out, and that was the end of the story. So that is very briefly the history of the Dutch in Canada. Okay, now let me tell you something about the sources that were produced as a result of all that. Well, if you want to work with sources or with archives and you want to understand what is the structure of the archives, you always have to think about what was the structure of the organization that produced the archives. Because usually the structure of the organization, the record creator we call it, is the same as the structure of the records itself. So here you see the structure of the VOC, the structure of the Dutch East India Company. There were 4 levels. Top level, Heren 17, it means the gentlemen 17. These were the board of directors of the company, based in the Netherlands. The second level, this means high government, governor general and council in Batavia. Batavia is now Jakarta in Indonesia. That was the highest authority of the company in Asia. So they came under those, the highest local in Asia. Under that came all these kantoren, right? I mentioned that name already. So these are regions, administrative regions. So one of them was, for instance, Malabar. But there were about 40 all over Asia. In South Africa, and then all the coastal areas between Yemen and Japan, at all these coasts the Dutch were based, including India. So you have all these kantoren, one of them Malabar, and then you have the individual factories. So that's the 4th layer. Sort of clear? Is this sort of clear? I see people not, so that's good. Okay, now all these levels created records, right? Because they were all doing their business and their administration and meetings and writing and whatnot. So they all created archives for 200 years. Okay, because it existed from 1602 to 1795. So almost 2 years of record creation. At all these levels, all these factories, all these kantoren. Now basically, the higher the level, the more the records are about polity, big decisions. The lower, the more the records are about day-to-day developments, and more about reporting. That's logical. It's not that here they're going to make big decisions about what to buy. But it's not here that they're going to make decisions about, we had a small disagreement with a trader, but it's already solved after 3 days. They don't care about that here. So different levels create different kind of information. So lots of records created. Much of it got lost. Unfortunately, that always happens to sources, to historical records, but much of it is still there. Here, you see an image of what is still left. So, VOC archives around the world in size. You can see this big gray circle. This is what is in the Archival Nasional, that's Indonesian for National Archives, of the Republic of Indonesia. So all this is still in Indonesia, in Jakarta. This, a bit less, is in the National Archives of the Netherlands. in the town of The Hague. Then you see there's still quite a bit in South Africa. There's still a bit in Sri Lanka, National Archives of Sri Lanka. There's still a bit in India, in the Tamil Nadu archives in Chennai. And there's also a little bit in the United Kingdom. Because these terrible British, they stole some of our Dutch record. So it's still there and they don't want to give it back. Even though they cannot read it. But okay, so all these records, they were created, scattered at different places. How much is it all together? If you put it in a row, like in a library, 5 kilometers. Do you use kilometers or miles? Kilometers. 5 kilometers. That's from here to the, how far is the city, the railway station of 14 kilometers. Okay, so 1/3 of the way to the railway station is all the Dutch records. Not only India, but everything. So it's a lot. It's about 20 million pages. So no one has read all this, you know? I think 90% has not been read by anyone. 300 years ago, they closed the books, no one has seen it. So there's still a lot of work to do. Of course, that's not all about Kerala, but a substantial part is about Kerala. By the way, this is not complete. There's also still a little bit in the Ernakulam Regional Archives, just a few centimeters. And there's also still a little bit in the West Bengal State Archives in Kolkata, 1 meter. And so it's not even complete. Okay, let's go back to this slide. And let's go to this level, the kantor level. So the regional establishments all over Asia. They all created their own archives. Many of those got lost. For instance, the kantor archives of Taiwan, or Persia, or Siam, which is now Thailand, they don't longer exist. But if you work on Malabar, Kerala, you are lucky, because those kantor archives, they're still there. They are actually now in the Tamil Nadu archives of Chennai. Why are they there and not here? Because when the British took over, Kerala became part of the Madras presidency, and everything in the Madras presidency they wanted to bring together. So all the old Dutch records in Kerala, they were brought to Chennai. That's the reason why they are there. It would be better if they would be here, because it's mostly about Kerala history, not completely, but mostly. But I don't think the Tamil Nadu government wants to give it back to you. And it's up to you to decide. But you can go to Chennai and it's all there. So let's have a look. Here you see a picture, part of the Dutch records. That's what they call it. They call it Dutch records of the VOC's Malabar establishment in the Tamil Nadu archives in Chennai. Until some years back, it was not maintained so nicely, but we had a very big project. We cleaned it, we put it in boxes. So now it looks like this. It's quite accessible. It is 64 meters, so a lot of records. It is mostly the 18th century, also a little bit 17th century, also a little bit early 19th century. It's a very interesting collection. And I should say, but I will explain later, partly it overlaps with the records in the Netherlands, in the National Archives. Yeah, so this is the kantor archive of Malabar, the regional archive of Malabar in Chennai. It partly overlaps with the archives of the highest level of the VOC in The Hague. Later I will explain to you why it overlaps. All the parts that don't overlap, so all the records that are unique, they are scanned. They're available online for free. So anyone can access it. So it's good to keep in mind. And these are unique documents. And the part that doesn't overlap, the unique information, you cannot find it anywhere else. Okay, I want to blame the British again, because they did some terrible things. Not only did they take your archives to Chennai, they also messed up the Dutch records. Because what did they do? So they found this whole Dutch archives of Malabar. When the Dutch left in 1795 from Kochi, They had to leave their records behind. The Dutch say, okay, give it. Sorry, the British said, give it to us. Hey, we have all this Dutch stuff. Actually, we can't read it. We have no idea what's in it. But we are going to reorganize it. So we will not keep all the different types of documents together, diaries with diaries, letters with letters. No, we're going to reorganize it chronologically. It must have been an enormous job. They reorganized it chronologically. I think it's terrible that they did that. And then they made a list. So, Archives of Malabar Kantoor, description in the British press list, made in the year 1900. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's just chronological. So they start with the document from 1657, the Roman Catholic Missal. I don't know why they put it there. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Dutch East India Company. I think they thought, hey, it's a Dutch book, let's put it with these Dutch records. And then you have all the records chronologically. So there's no structure. So as an archivist and as an historian, I don't think you like it. But that's what the British did. It was a bad idea. But okay. Then, so in the Netherlands we didn't like the situation. We thought it should be more accessible and you have an easier idea what you can find. So we were very happy because when we started to research these records about 10 to 20 years ago to make a new list, we found that one of the documents in the archives is actually the original list of the records that the Dutch gave to the British. And it has everything described per type of document. It's not so clear, I cannot read it, but let's say this is one type of document and they put all those documents together chronologically. And then the next type of document, put it all together chronologically. And so that helped us. So we reorganized it and we made a new description. You cannot read it, but later I will tell you more about this. So we reorganized all the documents per type of document. Not completely chronologically, but all the letters together, all the minutes of the meetings together, etc. Well, what is written here is Archives of the VOC Kantoor of Malabar. So all this are categories of documents from Malabar. A lot. Then here, there's also some stuff of Coromandel, Surat and Bengal. Because some small portions of Dutch records in those areas were also left behind for the British, and they brought it all together to Chennai because they thought, okay, all this Dutch stuff, let's put it together. But you see that the Dutch records in Chennai, most of it deals with Gadjah. Okay. This is of course all very technical, dry, maybe boring information. I don't know if you find it boring, but very archival. So let's look at some nice examples. This is, for instance, a document in the Dutch records in the Tamil Nadu archives. It's a notification, so a public announcement of the VOC issued at Cochin 1762 in Dutch, in Portuguese, because that was still the language that was used for communication, and Malayalam. This comes from a volume that has hundreds of these notifications. So it is very interesting, for instance, for linguists, if you're interested in language, because you have Old Malayalam compared with Portuguese and Old Dutch. So I find this very interesting, like a Rosetta Stone almost. A very interesting document. Another example from these Dutch records in Chennai is this. Malayalam letter to the VOC, 18th century, also in the Tamil Nadu archives. I don't know if you can see it, but actually this Dutch volume, I turned it a bit, so you can see this. This is, you call it Ola, Olai? Ola. Oh yeah, the Dutch call it Olai. Ola. So a palm leaf letter with original Malayalam. I don't know what it's about because I can't read it, but I think it's probably from a local trader. This is bound with the Dutch letters. And so I know you have lots of Ola's in the Kerala State Archives, the largest collection of palm leaves in the world, I was told. But there's also a little bit in the Dutch records, bound with the Dutch documents. So that can be quite interesting. Another example is, for instance, a letter from the Vicar Apostolic in Verapole. He wrote this letter to the Dutch. Look at the beautiful handwriting, nice drawing. So this shows you that in these Dutch records, okay, it's about the Dutch activities, but there's a lot of information about local parties, right? Because of course they were constantly dealing with all these local powers. As I told you, there's also a very small collection in the Ernakulam Regional Archives. They also call it the Dutch records there, and most of it is actually in Dutch, but officially it's not really part of the VOC archives. These are actually private letters by some individuals that were kept over time, and they are in Dutch, so they were made into a Dutch collection. It's more like private traders, private Indian traders that received letters from the Dutch. And another thing that is there is really beautiful, because of course the Dutch were constantly exchanging letters with the Kerala kings, right? So if they make a letter and send it to one of the kings, of course the Dutch made a copy for themselves, because they want to know, hey, what did we write to this king a few years ago? So that you can still find in the archives. But the letter that was actually sent to the king, so it is not part of the Dutch archives, but actually of the royal archives, that letter was really very nicely decorated, because of course they want to be nice to the king, right? Even though they don't like these kings, they still pretend that they are very respectful. So those letters look really wonderful. I don't know if you can see it, but there are all these gold leaf flower decorations. Here you can see it, here you can see it. So this is really interesting because it tells us what these letters could look like. So you never find these in the Dutch archives, because they only have a very normal looking copy. But the original one that was sent to the kings, you can now find in this Ernakulam Regional Archives, it tells you how they decorated the letter. Okay. I was telling you about these Malabar Kantor archives that are in Chennai, right? So that was the basis. Those were the documents created by the Dutch in Kerala. Part of this was then sent to higher levels of the country, right? Because the superiors, the bosses, they want to know what's going on, but they don't want all the details. They only want the important stuff. So part of the records were copied, sent to higher levels, ended up in the Netherlands. So if we go now from Chennai, Tamil Nadu State Archives, to the Netherlands, National Archives of the Netherlands, there's also, there's a very large collection there. So here you can see it, there's India, all the different areas. They all send their letters to Batavia, and selection of documents, and to Galle in southern Ceylon, and from there it is sent, and you can see it here, to Amsterdam, right? So what is created here, part of it is copied and goes directly or indirectly to the Netherlands. And it ends up here. Because what is this? Part of the archives of the VOC's chambers and gentlemen's etc. So that's the highest level. They created their own records. It's now kept in the Netherlands National Archives. Here you see a small part of it, but they also received a lot of letters and other documents from Asia, from all over Asia. Yemen to Japan, including India, including Kerala. So that's pretty large archives. It's about, what was it again, 1,200 meters, so over 1 kilometer of records, and about 15,000 volumes. So again, an enormous collection. And okay, this is the highest level, right? But because they got so much received so many documents from Asia, actually half of this is documents from Asia, copied from these kantor, from these regional archives. And so it's still very, very useful for research into Asian history, including Kerala history, because of all these records in the Netherlands. About half, 6,000 thick volumes, is documents received from Asia. I think it's about 600 meters. No one really counted it, but I think it's 600 meters. And hundreds of these volumes deal with Malabar, 17th and 18th century. I'll show you more examples later, but just to give you one nice example, what do you see here? A Dutch document in the National Archives of the Netherlands from 1790, and it's a report by the VOC on a battle with Tipu Sultan. You all know that in the late 18th century, Hyder Ali Khan and Tipu Sultan tried to conquer Kerala, so the Dutch also had to fight with him, with Tipu Sultan, and they made a report. And here you even see a drawing. So this is the Dutch. These are the troops of Tipu Sultan, and maybe you know that Tipu Sultan was famous for using rockets. Look, here are the rockets. Even the Dutch had to suffer the rockets of Tipu Sultan. So it's a nice example of the stuff you can find in the National Archives. Okay, I hope you don't find it too complicated, but so there are records of the kantor level, right? Created here in Kerala. They are now in the Tamil Nadu archives in Chennai. Part of those records at that time were copied and sent to Batavia, to the Netherlands, all ended up in the Netherlands National Archives. This is an example. There are also lots of other records that just by artists, by scientists, by all sorts of people, that also Dutch people who made produced sources of Kerala that arrived everywhere in the world, because some actually were collected by people. So let me give you some nice examples of this. This is a letter. Here's the letter with a second. Here's the second. It's still there, from King Rama Varma of Kochi to the Dutch ruler William V of Orange. So it was sent by the Kochi king to the Dutch king. So now it's part of the archives of the royal house in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And so that letter is still kept, and you can see the original second, and also the signature of that king. Can you read it? To me, it doesn't even look like Malayalam, but that was his signature. Yeah, so it ended up at a different place. Here's another example. It's a drawing of a Kerala plover, some kind of bird. Because it's such a nice drawing, and it was probably a private drawing, not made, it was not part of the VOC archives. It's now in the Rijksmuseum, the National Museum of the Netherlands. These are drawings of Keralites, Kerala people, as the VOC thought they looked like, right? Of course, they are a bit Orientalistic. I don't know if you're familiar with the term Orientalist, but of course, you know, it's a bit Eurocentric. But what you see here is a Brahmin of the coast of Malabar. Oh, thank you so much. So apparently they look like this. Here you see a Malabar pilgrim. So I think it's a kind of sadhu. What do you think? Going with sadhu. Here, a Malabar. Okay, I can't really read this, but I think this is supposed to be a Nayar. How do you pronounce it?
Nayar.
Nayar, not Nayar. Nayar. Martin. Okay, so they are now in the Amsterdam University Library and also in an abbey in Switzerland. And so some of these documents, they just end up anywhere. This is a small little painting of the famous Jewish Kochi-based merchant Ezekiel Rabbi. I don't know if you know him. That painting is now in the Zeeland Museum. So some stuff ends up at different places. One last example. Here's a description. It says alphabet of the Sanskrit Malabar language. It's in Oxford. Again, this is something the British stole from us. So now it's in Oxford. But it tells you, I think what it means, I never really studied this document very closely, but I think it means if you want to write Malayalam in Sanskrit script, these are the letters you can use. Something like that. But if you know, if you can guess what it is, let me know. But so this is to show you not only trade, also politics, nature, local communities, language, all this information you can find in these records. Okay, so far any questions?
May I ask?
Yeah, of course.
Good morning, thank you very much. I am also a student, research student in management. But because I studied tourism, it was very interesting for me to participate today and find out some tourism prospects about this. The findings you have made and studies you have done so far. That Arabic language I saw is Persian or Arabic. Could you please explore about it?
I have no idea. I cannot tell you because I know it's there. This is also a problem. There is so much. There is still so much we don't know. So this document.
Yes, this is.
Yes, it's beautiful. It's high time someone studies it.
The first word salon, I could read that one. Maybe it's a Persian or Arabic.
Yeah, but we have so much information, and in the Netherlands we don't have enough people to research all this. That's why actually we are coming to Kerala and tell you guys, you have to help us. You have to learn Dutch and you have to do this research because it's too much for us. I will explain you soon how much it is.
Yeah, I have the photo of this now. The next is
Other questions?
So we just answer this question. Now you're showing that some essays that Brahmin like.
Yeah, this one.
Previous one.
You want to go back?
Yes.
Yeah, again, go back. This one.
Yes.
This one.
Yes. There's no period. There's no period of time.
Period.
No.
And which period?
Okay, I'm not sure. I can look it up for you. I think it's probably 18th century. Because many of these drawings were made by German people serving in the Dutch East India Company, and most Germans were serving the Dutch East India Company in the 18th century. So I think probably 18th century. But if you really want to know, send me an email, I'll look it up for you. If the date is known at all. Okay, so this was my part about telling you something about the structure, right? You have some idea. Okay, now let me tell you something about the contents. So what is in all these documents? Okay, here again you have the descriptions in the new inventory of the Dutch records in Tamil Nadu archives. So this is the new list we made of the Malabar Kantor archives. And I picked out a few types of documents. It's because this is organized on type of document. So for instance, there are resoluties. It means minutes, notes of meetings. Because several times a week, the Dutch in Kochi, they would meet, discuss everything that was going on, and make decisions. There are memories van overgave. I will tell you more about some of these records later, but just to introduce memories van overgave. It means that every time the highest VOC person, the commander, when he left, he would write a long report for his successor. Like, oh, I've been here for 4 years, this is what happened. It can be like hundreds of pages document, explaining everything that was going on. There is, for instance, this category, Inlandse Dagregister. It means indigenous diary. It's a day-to-day report of everything going on locally, politically. I'll tell you more about that later. There are diaries of expeditions and commissions. So if there was a war, the Dutch fought with Travancore, the Dutch fought with Calicut, big wars, every day they would report what was going on. There are diaries of commissions that includes embassies. So the Dutch would send ambassadors to all these courts. They would keep a diary of what happened. This is correspondence with Batavia and the Netherlands. There you see, I told you about it already. All these different documents. This is correspondence with local kings. And you have like about 50 rulers. I don't know if anyone knows the exact number. All these kings and princes and whatnot, Dutch were corresponding with all of them. And so all that correspondence is still there. These are documents about justice. And they include civil cases and criminal cases. Now why is that relevant? Because when there were lawsuits, they had to call in witnesses. And sometimes the witnesses were local people or even slaves. And suddenly you find the names of the slaves and their opinions in the records. That's very rare. Of course, all these records, they're never about the slaves, right? They're all created by these important Dutchmen, important Kerala people like kings and princes, etc. Where will you find the voice of the common man or even the slave? You never find it except here, because there suddenly the slaves have a role to play, because they have to explain, maybe they were witness to something, they have to explain it. So these are now very interesting for us, and we are trying to work with these records. Let me select another one. Yeah, talking about slaves, certificates, and other pieces concerning slaves. I'm sorry to say the Dutch also traded in slaves in Kerala. Not something to be proud of, but okay, it happened, and there are all these documents still about these slaves. So it can tell you a lot about people in 17th, 18th century Kerala lower castes. So you can find that information there too. Okay. Briefly, I could say all this information is an essential source for Kerala from the mid-17th century to the late 18th century. And of course, there's a lot of information on what you would expect. Trade, shipping, personnel, all the usual company administration. But there's also information on everything that somehow influences the trade. It can be politics, culture, religion, society, nature, law, castes, all that might be mentioned. Let me give you an example. Let's say if there's a big war, say between Tekkumkur and Kayankulam, then the trade will be disrupted. So the Dutch have to explain to their superiors, oh, this year the trade was not very good, because, well, Kayankulam was fighting with Tekkumkur because one prince was adopted or something very complicated, and then there was another prince who was not happy, so blah blah blah, and then for pages they will describe what was going on. And suddenly you get all this information about local politics. Or another example, let's say the weather was really bad, so the harvest was not good, and the pepper was not good. Of course the Dutch have to explain to their bosses. So they will tell you extensively about the weather, which is really interesting information now with the climate change, right? So there's all this other information that can help you. Okay, a way to summarize it, this you have already seen. Economic information, political information, cultural information. Another way to describe it, there's a lot of information about the Dutch in India. That's logical, right? They were there, they have to document everything they do. So here you see a Dutch governor with his family, the Dutch in India. There's also a lot of information about the Dutch and India. Here you see a Dutch trader shaking hands with an Indian trader. There was a lot of interaction, we call it cross-cultural context. Then finally, there's also quite a bit of Dutch information about India. So even things they were not directly involved in, they will still write about it. This is a drawing of temple dancers in Chidambaram. Yeah. Okay. So you have an idea of the kind of information, but how much is it? Okay. This is another example to tell you what kind of information is there. In 1735, there was a new commander. So the highest VOC official in Malabar. His name was Stijn van Gollonesse. And what he did when he arrived, he sent letters to all the Kerala rulers, telling them, hello guys, I'm the new commander, I hope we can have nice relations, etc. This is the list of rulers he sent that letter to. Here are all the names. Can you read it? Maybe I can make it a bit larger. Purakat, Kayamkulam, Point Odanat, I think. The Marta, Kolastai, that's the Kolatini. Kulanganur. Mangati, that is Alamgadu. Parur, Kanur. Of course, many of these I don't know, you know. I have no idea who they are. But these were all people that received that letter. And many of them also replied. Like, okay, welcome here, but don't think that we will do everything we say. This is Kolam, Desinganadu, Travancore, Tekumkur, Vadakumkur, Paliat Achan. These are Kaimals, right? It's some kind of local prince, right? Kaimal. You don't know that word? Kaimal. Yeah. Kaimal. Kaimal. I would have to stress it. Martana. Kaimal. Here, the queen of Attinga, the queen of Kochi. So, just to give you an idea, all these rulers, the Dutch were in contact with, and they exchanged documents. So you find information on all these little and not so little kingdoms. Okay, so you have an idea what kind of information. Now let me tell you how much information. Okay, what do you see here? A big volume. What does it say? Fourth part of letters and papers from Malabar arrived. Arrived in 1736. 18. Okay, what does it all mean? So the year is 1736. Papers arrived in the Netherlands in 1736. So it all deals with 1735, because it takes almost a year for the papers to arrive in the Netherlands. This is the 18th volume of that year. The papers arrived from Asia. I told you, from Yemen to Japan. It's the fourth part of that year arrived from Malabar. So only for this year, 1735, you have 4 of these volumes. So let's say this pile of information, all about Malabar, for just 1 year. And then you have this for 150 years. So it's really a lot. I cannot do it on my own. You guys have to help me.
So, an earlier document in Arabic, that is said, earlier one document is in Arabic. To me, I will capture a picture and I will help you to read.
Okay. Well, you will help her to read.
So is it Arabic or Syriac?
If it is Arabic, it will be okay.
Yeah.
I
can't
can't
tell
in
you.
Arabic.
The first word is salon, which I could read, but the other one is not so clear because stylistic writing is different. There are some.
I can also send you it later.
It may be in
Okay. Okay. So let me continue. So you have every year you have like 4 of these volumes. Now if you open it, let's open it. This is what you see. You see a table of contents at the beginning. And so the first pages tell you what's in the volume. So from page 2 to page something, blah blah blah. This document. From this page to this page, that document. And so all these documents are in this volume. Now what we did, we couldn't finish it because the money ran out, but what we tried to do, for all these volumes, 6,000 volumes, including Malabar, we put these descriptions in a database. So not the real documents, right? Only the descriptions we put in the database. And we tried to organize them. Then we made a PDF for every kantor with all the descriptions. So one of them was Malabar. So in all these volumes, all the documents concerning Malabar, we put them in a PDF. So it's only the descriptions. Here you see the first page of that PDF with all the descriptions of documents. 675 pages in the PDF, only the descriptions. So can you imagine the documents itself? It's overwhelming. For me, it's a problem. I want to do Kerala history with Dutch records. I don't know where to begin. It's so much. Okay. Any questions about this? So I told you a bit about the structure. I told you, like, what can you find in these documents? Sort of clear? You have enough, or should I go on? Go on? Okay. Then, next part, I will tell you a little bit more about some different types of documents that are really relevant for local Kerala history and what you can find, just to give you some examples. Okay, the first example is the regular letters sent from Kochi to Batavia and to the Netherlands. So every 3-4 months, all the information from all the factories in Kerala was collected, and in one big letter, Kochi would report to the higher levels. So it's like a quarterly letter from Kochi to Batavia or to Netherlands. This is an example from April 1735. That letter is 248 pages long, so it's an enormous letter. It will take you hours and hours to read it. There's always a section with all the latest news of the local kings. That was really important for the Dutch, right? So of course they talk about the trade, shipping, all the usual topics. They also discuss all the kings. Here you find little parts from the pages from the kings. And they do it always from north to south. So they start, it's not so clear, but it says, de vrouwen regentinnen Adi Raja. So this is about the Adi Rajas in Kannur. And at that time there was apparently a female regent. So this is not all, this is only the first few lines, right? So for a few pages they will talk about her. Then, Prince of Kolasti, so the Kolatiri prince. Again, in the past months, blah blah blah, he did this, he did that, we don't like him, or we do like him, whatever, blah blah blah. Balnur of Bargar. You know who that is? Balnur of Bargar. I don't even know. Local prince. Samorin. Right, Samorin. And it goes on, from north to south. Many pages later, we are here. Pula de Bartate and Gurib. What do you think it is? Of course, the Dutch always corrupt the names, right? This is Gurub of Travancore. So they don't only talk about the Travancore king, which is here, king of Travancore. They also have a special section about the Kurub of Travancore. Kurub is general, right? The military commander. No? It's a cost name, but I think the Dutch use it to refer to an important general. I don't know. I still have to find it. Okay. Queen of de Marta. Do you know what it is? De Marta? I don't know. Someone has to find out. Queen of Nepolim. You don't know what it is? But it tells you all these different kingdoms, states, princedoms, etc. They were all reported every few months, year after year after year. So even if you want to do just one of the kingdoms, and that's my plan, or maybe 3, I don't know, I just started, it is years of work. So we need more people from Kerala, I keep on saying it, to help us. Okay, so this is one type of document, the regular letter from Kochi. Okay, another example. Memories van Overgave, I already mentioned it. Final memorandums. So as I told you, when the highest person, the governor, but in Kerala is called commandeur, when he left, after let's say 4 or 5 years, he would write a letter for his successor. And it gives you a bird's eye view of 4 or 5 years of what happened. Usually also quite long document, but it's a good way to start. Like, okay, what happened in these few years? Here you have the years from which we still have it, because not all survived. So here you have some of the names. Here is Van Riet, Van Reden, he wrote one. It's the only type of document that has been published, most of them, in the many of them in the so-called Dutch selection of Dutch records. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they were published in Dutch, so still you cannot read it. Only 2 were published in English by Galetti. I don't know if you're familiar, but 2 of them were published in English. It's nice to read them. If you search on Galetti and Dutch, you will find it. It gives you an idea of the information that you can find. But okay, what is in those reports? Well, the one by Van Riet, it has been published. So I took some parts from the published version to give you an idea what you can find. Of course, this is again just the first 3 lines. The sections are much longer, but there is a section on the Nambutiri. Nambutiri. How do you pronounce it? Nambutiri. So he says the Brahmins are again divided in kings, priests or Namburis, blah 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 blah. The kings under the Brahmins, so he's saying, okay, which kings are actually Brahmins? Urakat, Repoling, Paru and others. So he's telling you. Next part, Patars. Tamil Brahmins, right? Huh? Paktar. Okay. The Patamares or Patares are also Brahmins, but not from Malabar, but from the countries of Karnataka, Senji and Tanjavur. Blah 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 blah. Next one. The way of government. People cannot say that the Kerala people and the Malabar people are governed by a kingly or single-headed government. His words. You cannot say that. But you can also not say that they are a republic. But, and then you can read, I will not tell you what he thinks was the way. The number of nayars. Here he will tell you exactly which king had how many nayars. History. So he gives, in that year, he gives you some history. Shram Perumal. Who do you think it is? Who is your most famous king in the early Middle Ages? The most famous Chera king? That's him. He's explaining. So this name, who was considered to be a lord and a king about all the countries between Kayalpatnam and Kannada. So from the Tamil border to the Karnataka border. This king has blah blah blah. I'm not going to tell you. You have to read it yourself. And they're Dutch. Okay, it talks about the way families are arranged, about succession to the throne, about the power of kings, about princesses, not only princes but also princesses. It talks about taxes. It talks about administrators of justice, law. It talks about temple lands and royal protection. It talks about Thomas Christians. It talks about Latin Christians. So I think what he means is the Christians converted by the Portuguese. Toepassen. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's people of mixed European Indian descent. He talks about landlords. He talks about twists between the Veloze Nambiar, Mudianatu Nambiar. I don't know if you know them, but these are also local lords. So just to give you an idea, in these memories van overgave, these memorandums, what kind of information you can find. Again, not just trade and shipping, but really descriptions of everything that was going on. Okay. I think 5 or 6 categories I want to show you. The third one, identified, because we still haven't found all of them, but so far identified diaries or reports of VOC, hofreizen. Hofreis means court journey, so embassies. And so the Dutch would send ambassadors to all these kings all the time, because there were always problems that had to be solved. So these are the ones we have identified. And so about 50 reports in total. Here you see the years, to about 15 kingdoms. Alamdaru, Attingal, Badagara, Kanur, Kayampulam, Kochi, Grand Kanur, Kolam, Kozhikode, Parur, Purakap, Tekunkur, Jaipur, Karakunkur, Waluwalai. So, a lot of information. Usually they're quite long. So, let me show you what it looks like. So it says report, blah, blah, blah. This one to King of Travancore and Kali Koilan, which was the Dutch name for Kayampulam. Yeah, or Odana, right? And the Sinyati. And Sinyati was the ruler of Kolam. Yeah. Here also, Ola. You see the word Ola? Ola. Yeah. Ola of the Gadjah, so the king of Kalikulam. And so, to show you that what it looks like and how they talk about it. 2 examples of a report of an embassy to Travancore and Kolam in 1665 about interactions with the kings. So what it says here, we came to the second prince of Travancore, who received us very friendly and shook our hands. I don't know if that's surprising, but I always learned you can never touch the king, right? He's sacred. But the Dutch say that the kings just shake their hands. I don't know if this is surprising or maybe it's very logical, but to me it's quite striking. Another part, we came to the Queen Signati. So that's the Queen of Kolam. So they were not received by the king, but by the Queen. And then they are treated in a very nice way because she provided us with food. And so the Dutch were given food by the Queen, and it was served to us by the Namburis. That's the Nambu, what you call it, the Brahmins? Yeah. So they had to serve Dutch food to the food of the Queen to the Dutch. I don't know if they liked it, but they had to do it. And then they write that, so the Queen wanted to see how the Dutch were eating that food. So they say, so she wants to see how I, the ambassador, and my companions eat the food. And therefore she was standing in the doorway, like this, and looking at the Dutch eating. She wanted to see how the Dutch did it. And then they said, it's an exceptional honor. Never any European got that honor. Well, I don't know if it's true. Maybe the Dutch ambassador was posting here. Of course, you can never 100% trust it, right? This is what they say. Is it true? I don't know. Also, what you find in this report of these embassies are gifts to the court. So this is from an embassy to Attingal in 1688 to the Queen of Attingal. These are the gifts she got. Usually it's spices, textiles, sometimes it's special things like weapons or jewelry. They also gave gifts to the King of Travancore in the same trip, but not so many. They gave more to the Queen. I don't know what it means, but it's interesting, right? What's also interesting is that they also say, yeah, we gave gifts to Ellen Pandale. I don't know if you can recognize it. And Gadjah Madame Poele. And then they explain, these are 2 very prominent and powerful ragiadors. And I think ragiadors is a Dutch term for other important people at the court, like officials. So these two guys also get gifts. So it tells you that they were also really important at the court. So it tells you also about political power at the court. You can deduct from these lists. Okay, this is the most spectacular one. Another type of document I want to explain. It's called inheemse dagregisters. That means indigenous diaries, if you translate literally, daily reports of local political events. So, I'm not the only one who thinks that 17th and 18th century Gadjah is really complicated when it comes to politics. The Dutch at that time also thought it was really complicated. So they wanted to get grip. How does it work? So only for the Malabar Kantor, not for any other Kantor in Asia or India, only Malabar, they created a separate category of document, the indigenous diaries. So every day, if they hear something about local developments, they will write it down. If they get a letter from any of the kings, they will write the letter down. If they send any letter to the king, they will write it down. So every day there is information about local politics. Every year, for a period of 60 years, they have done this. And it's so much per year that these two volumes together are these diaries, these indigenous diaries. Together, 2110 pages of local developments in the period of 1 year. So I tried to read 1 year recently. I gave up. It's just too much. What to do? And in a way, I almost regret starting working on Kerala because it's just too much for me. And can you imagine for 1 year you have to read all this? Because my first plan for my research was, I don't want to focus on one kingdom, I want to write about all the kingdoms. Because I want to describe how they are all related with all the different adoptions and, they're all ritually and dynastically connected. But I think I have to give up on that idea because it's just too much. But let me tell you what kind of information you can find. So, 2 volumes, a lot. The Dutch try to help you because they start the volume with an index. So if you open it, there's first an index per kingdom. Adi Raja. So here the reference to the Adi Raja. Berkunkur, that is Barakunkur. Mangati, that is Alangadu, near Kochi. These are just some examples. In total, the index is 35 pages. Samorai. Travancore. You see lots of reference to Travancore. So this helps you, but I wanted to do everything. Can you imagine? It's just not possible. So I have to make a selection. But it's to give you an idea how much there is, but also very accessible. Okay, what kind of information do you find there? It's just a few examples. For instance, something about temple endowment and adoption ceremony. So here it says the second prince of Paru, which is Parur, near... Okay, I don't know if it's the same place, but anyway, a place near Kochi, and it says that that prince, he went to Tiruparpu. You know that place? Tiruparpu. In Kekunkur. And he went to the temple there to pay honor at that temple, and he offered a small elephant. So it even tells you that kind of information. Or here, this is a letter sent by the female Kaimal. So they're not only male Kaimals, but also female Kaimals, of Korete. You know that place? Anyway, and she is also the adopted second princess of Bangati, Alangadu. So you get all this information about the background. And then she says that we have heard, so she writes to the Dutch, that she has heard that the Raja Karta Dawil, which I think is the Raja of Aramdanu, I'm a bit confused now, by Chere, I don't know where it is, 16,000 nayas she gathered, and that Raja put the ring of adoption to the fingers of the princess of Cochin from the branch Tianme. So I don't know, is that familiar that the adoption ceremony was always with a ring? Yeah? Okay. So it's also described here. So again, you get all these details about local customs, local politics. Okay, the last category I want to discuss briefly is maps. There are also, let me make sure I didn't forget anything. Yeah, there are also, I think, about 100 manuscript maps. Mostly, of course, about the Dutch possessions. So here you see a map of Fort Cochin, 1690s. Some of the streets are still there, The Princess Street. Have you been to Cochin? It's where that street where you have the most hotels, the most touristic street. Princess Street, Rose Street, Peter Selle Street. These are actually original Dutch names. So you find many of these maps, but you find also maps that have much more information about local things. This is an incredible map. It's 3 meters long. It more or less covers this whole table. It's a fantastic map. It shows the whole area between Kranganur and Kollam in much detail. So this is the Kranganur area, and it tells you where is the king's temple, the king's fort, the king's house, all these details, where you can find it. This is the part of Kollam. So if you zoom in, this is, for instance, the Alangadu area, so close to Cochin. So many details about where the king lives, where the queen lives, where the second prince lives, what is the most important temple, blah, 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 blah. And fortunately, this is the Tekkumpur area, and there's a local historian, Palikonom Rajiv. I don't know if any of you knows him, very enthusiastic local historian. He added the modern names. So he used this map and he put all the, so yeah, really useful. How long have I been talking? What do you want? I can stop here if you are tired, but I can also tell you a little bit about how the Dutch documents compare to the Indian sources. You want that or enough? You want that? Okay, I don't want to. Okay, that will be the last part. But any questions? Is it clear or is it confusing? If it's intimidating, that's good. That's my purpose. I want to convince you that these are important documents. Okay, last part of my presentation. The question is, okay, so there's a lot of information, right? I hope I've convinced you. There's a lot about many different topics. It's too much for one person to read in his life. It's too much for 1,000 people to read in their lives. But what can you do in this information? How reliable is it? And can you trust it? So what I try is to put the information in some context by comparing the Dutch sources with Indian sources. Now, I told you I just started working on Kerala. So I have not really done any research on Kerala, but I recently published a book about the Nayaka states. Madurai, Tanjavur, Setupatis of Ramnad, Nayakas of Ikeri. So what I did for that research is compare Dutch records with local sources. So I'll show you some examples of that, but I think whatever I found for those areas, the same will be true for Kerala. So it still gives you an idea. So to tell you very briefly about my previous research, you see a European map. I looked at Vijayanagar, But I especially looked at what we call the successor states. Ikeri, Madurai, Rama, Tanjore, also looked a bit at Harialur. And my research was about the courts, the royal courts of these kingdoms and the political relations. That is, my book was recently published also by Manohar in Delhi. And what I try to do is combine the Dutch sources with Indian sources, like chronicles, treatises, political treatises, shastras, images, all that kind of stuff. So to give you an example, here you see a Telugu inscription from 1710 by Vijayaranga Chokkanatha Nayaka of Madurai. And here you see a Dutch document, diary of a visit by the same king, almost in the same year, to the Dutch. That's to give you an example, like you have the same person, same king, two totally different sources, Indian and Dutch. What happens if you confront them, if you bring them together? That's my question. So very briefly, like in Kerala, also in this area, the Dutch were very deeply engaged with these courts. They were constantly exchanging embassies, letters, people. So there's a lot of information also in the Dutch records about these Nayakas, although not as much as Kerala, but still a lot. Of course, both sources, historical sources, have problems. They have their pros and they have their cons. Basically, I think with Indian sources you can say they were often produced under royal patronage, so they tend to glorify the kings. They're described as ideal rulers. Or you have political treatises like Shastras, they tell you what were the rules, but they don't tell you what was in practice, right? Often also these Indian texts, not this one, but many others, are undated. So you have, let's say, a chronicle, like a Vamshavali, we call it. I don't know if that word is familiar here. You don't know the date. You don't know the author. So how reliable is it, right? So that's a problem with Indian sources. There's also a big problem with the Dutch sources, because they are, of course, very biased. I'm not going to repeat here what sometimes the Dutch say about Kerala people. It's really terrible. They're lazy, superstitious, they're basically terrible, they're always fighting, you cannot trust them. It's full of such remarks. Of course I find it a bit embarrassing when I read it, but yeah, those were different times. So these records are very biased, Orientalist, Eurocentric. And also, sometimes maybe the Dutch didn't understand things. They write names, no one knows what it means, maybe they misunderstood, or maybe they made a trip to a court, an embassy report, and it was a big failure, and they don't want to tell their superiors, so they just invent another story. You don't know. So with both sources you have problems. So the best thing is bring them together, and maybe you get a more nuanced, more rich idea. So that's what I try to do. So what I will show you in the last part is I confront the Dutch sources and the Indian sources on 4 topics. About successions to the throne, about courtiers, so I mean people at court, anyone except for the king, and how much power they have, court protocol, so what are the ceremonies, and insult, because if you don't follow the protocol you can insult someone, and royal titles. So, quickly. Okay, the example I will give to you about succession to the throne, it's for the Nayakas of Ikeri, but still quite close to Kerala, right? And in September 1661 there was a succession to the throne. From Venkatappa Nayaka II, he was actually the brother of Shivappa Nayaka who was reigning before, and he was succeeded by his nephew, Bhadrappa Nayaka, who was Shivappa's son. And so the uncle is succeeded by the nephew. Okay, now there is a Kannada chronicle called the Keladi Arasara from Shavali. It just tells you the history of the kings of Ikeri. It's from the late 18th century, so it is more than a century later than the event. Well, at least it was recorded at that time. We don't know when the text was composed. Okay, I cannot read Kannada, but fortunately, I don't know if you're familiar with Mackenzie, the Mackenzie collections. It was a British guy who in the year 1800 collected lots of Indian texts, also from Kerala, and he had them translated immediately. And the translations are now in London. So I went to read all those translations. So this is a translation from the year 1800 of that chronicle. And what does it say in a bit funny English? Venkatapati Nayak, so that's the uncle. Huh?
Venkatapati Nayak.
Venkatapati Nayak, the brother of Shiva Panaya, was acknowledged at the Auramana, which means palace. And so first they talk about how the uncle came on the throne. At the Auramana of Bidunur, which is Bednur, which was the capital of the kingdom, and assumed the government of all the kingdom. He, that's the uncle, maintained his nephew Badrapanayak in an honorable manner, becoming his rank. So they're saying the uncle ascended the throne and he was very kind to his nephew. Then he, still the uncle, governed his kingdom without dread of the wicked. I think that's very nice of English, without dread of the wicked, from the, and then a very complicated date, but it means 6060, to blah 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 6061. So he was only on the throne for 1 year. Then Badrapanayak, so that's the nephew, the eldest son of Shiva Panaya, was then acknowledged in the kingdom. He governed mildly and reputed. There are also some other chronicles about the Nayakas of Ikiri. They all more or less tell the same story. So that it was a very peaceful, harmonious succession to the throne. So this is also what you find in most secondary literature. There are some books like A History of the Nayakas of Ikiri, or one is called Keladi Polity. It's all about, and it describes this as a very peaceful event. Now the Dutch, they were nearby during that moment on the coast. They also wrote about this event. Let's see what they say. This is all about the succession. It's only part of that document. There's much more. There are many other documents. But maybe it was not so simple as the Chronicle says, right? Very long story about what happened. Now let us read a very short part about what the Dutch had to say. I translated it for you about what the Dutch had to say about this. So they're writing. So this is a letter from Van Moerla. It's a small place north of Goa, to Batavia. And so they're reporting about what happened. So we were informed, they said, how? So this is the Dutch speaking. Ventapanayak, the uncle, was killed by the general named Shivalingam with the help of Badrapanayak, that's the nephew, the eldest son of the deceased Shiva Panayak. And so this shows you that the Dutch also know the family relations. And how mentioned prince, so that's the nephew, was raised to the throne in his father's place. This happened because that Ventapanayak, so that's the uncle, loved the single-headed reign too much. So they mean to say he was a dictator, which not only made him forget to pay appropriate respect to the said prince. So this is, how do you say, directly opposing the other documents. The other documents said he maintained his nephew with great respect. Here they said made him forget to pay appropriate respect to the said prince and the general. But moreover, he, that's the uncle, secretly decided to take Shivalingya's life, so he wanted to kill the general, and Badrapanayak's side, so he wanted to blind his nephew. Then he could not ascend the throne anymore. But they, so that's the general and the nephew, observing matters were not right, wangled for so long that they found out about the secret of the uncle. And seeing the approaching danger that threatened them, they resolved to make a virtue of necessity and let Ventapanayak, the uncle, fall into the trap that was set for them. On September 8th, lost. The aforesaid prince, that's so the nephew, and the general, both provided with a good saber, without any retinue but 2 or 3 trusted guards, moved in the morning at dawn to the palace of Uncle Ventapanara, whom they called in his bedroom as he was waking up, accompanied by the chief counselor and the chamberlain. So the uncle, the king, he was waking up with some servants. Grasping the betrayal, the king, and so the uncle, called for his handgun, but jumping to him, Shivalingya, that's the general, dealt Ventapanara a blow on the head so heavy that he fell on the ground and vomited his soul right away. That's a nice Dutch way of saying he died. The counselor and chamberlain who tried to protect the king were also hacked down. Seeing their intention accomplished as desired, they, that's the uncle, the nephew and the general, hastily commanded that the gate of the palace be closed and reinforced with trusted guards until order had been restored. So that's the Dutch story. Totally different. Now whom should we believe? So, you are a historian. This is your 2 sources. What do you do? It's difficult, huh? Yeah. So I also had a big problem. Yeah, what to do? Do I believe the Indian source? I'm an Indologist. I want to believe the Indian source. But I'm also Dutch. Do I want to believe the Dutch source? So, we will never know. I think that's simple. We will never know. But you can wonder what was the purpose of each source and how did they get their information. Now, this source, this chronicle, it was written under the patronage of the descendants of that nephew. Because that nephew came on the throne, right? Whether he killed his uncle or not, we don't know. He came on the throne, and from him all the next Nayakas of Ikari spread. So 1 century later, the text was composed under the descendants of that prince. So it has a certain purpose. It has to justify the rule of that branch, right? That's why you make chronicles. You want to justify your rule. Now the Dutch story. The question is, how did they get their information? Well, they were not in that room, right? They were not there writing down, oh, now he is hitting him. No, these were just rumors. This is just what people were telling. So let's say they have friends, traders with whom they interact. Sometimes the Dutch had local mistresses. There's all this gossip in the bazaar, you know? These are just stories going around, which you also cannot trust. But do you think that if it was a completely peaceful transition, a completely peaceful succession to the throne, you think these rumors would be circulating? Not likely, right? So, and this is actually not, this is what you could call the local voice, because the Dutch reported the rumors. So this is what people in the Ikari kingdom were saying. I think. You don't have to agree with me, it's up to you. But that's what I think. So my feeling is, all the details, I'm not sure, I don't trust all the details. But I think there was violence. I think that is acceptable. And it makes sense, because the Dutch just recorded the rumors. Of course, the stories were a bit blown up, exaggerated, etc. But probably there was a conflict. And probably the uncle was really killed by some people supporting the prince, I think. And it also makes sense that the chronicle doesn't say it, because as I told you, the descendants of that prince, they're not going to say, hey, you know, we are now the rulers of Ikari, and our great-great-grandfather, he actually didn't deserve the throne, but he killed his uncle. No, they're not going to say that in the chronicle, right? They have to make a nice story. So if I combine these 2 sources, I think, yeah, it was probably a violent succession to the throne. But you don't have to agree with me. But the conclusion of the story is, if you bring it together, it helps you think about both sources, and maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, Anyway, this is a case of the Indian sources and the Dutch sources contradicting. Give you totally different information. Okay. Then let's go to the next topic. Courtiers. I mean anyone at court except for the king or the queen and their powers. Okay, if you read the secondary literature about the composition of the royal court, and the secondary literature is mostly based on Indian sources, so inscriptions, chronicles, those kind of documents, because real administration is usually not present anymore. You get the following impression. There are standard functions, standard offices, and what the people in those offices have to do is strictly demarcated, and there's a strict hierarchy. And so the overall description is that it is very static and very hierarchic. So basically the story is you always have a Pradhani, the prime minister, who is the highest official after the king, of course. Then there's a Dallavai. This is a Dallavai, really difficult. Who is the general, the chief commander. And there's always a Rayas, the royal secretary. And so if you read those secondary literature, it's always in this order. And their different tasks are very precisely described. Here you just see some pictures of what these guys, and sometimes also women, look like. Okay, and so fixed top positions and a strict hierarchy. And also the idea that the king is an absolute ruler and all the courtiers are very loyal to the king. Now, I was curious what the Dutch had to say about this. And one of the things I could use is this document. I already showed you an example. List of gifts to the king and courtiers. And so the Dutch send these embassies every so many years, and they give gifts, of course to the king, but also to certain people at the court. Why did they do that? Because the Dutch thought, okay, this guy, let's say the Pradhani or whoever, he has a lot of influence at this court. So if we give him a lot of gifts, he will make sure that we get good trade benefits. Yeah, because that's what the Dutch, all they cared about is, we want to do good trade, make a lot of money. So if we give gifts to this guy, it will be good for us. That's based on their idea who was most influential. They would distribute these gifts. And here you see it. So it's not very clear, but here it says to the king. So this is all the gifts to the king. Some jewelry, and some guns. And then there are other people, courtiers, who also get gifts. So it tells you something about who is more and less important, according to the Dutch. Now if you bring all these gift lists together in the course of time, and you make like a top 10, top 7, you see some patterns. So that's what I did. So here, distribution of gifts at VOC embassies to the Nayakas of Madurai in order of value, so who get most, who gets less, from 1668 to 1731. There were 7 embassies. Now what do you see? I don't know, can you read this? Difficult? So it's better if I tell you what you can see. Okay, of course the king, and in one case Queen Mangamo, they always get most gifts. That's logical, right? It's still the king or the queen, so that person has to get most gifts. But what about number 2, 3, 4, etc.? So let's look at the second row. If you can read, what do you see? Maybe I should ask one of you, because you're so close. Just tell me, what do you notice? So this is always the function, and this is the name of the person. What can you do? I don't know, maybe you're not a historian, I don't know, but what can you do if you see this? Maybe I should tell you. So here, you have a Pradhani. According to the Dutch, the second most important person. Mada Malaya Papila was his name. Some years later, also a Pradhani. So that is sort of, that matches, right, with this. But then look at the third year, there's a Dalava. And then here, also a Dalava. Strange. Here again a Dalavai. Maybe he was also a Pradhani, that's not clear. Then here Pradhani again, and there a Dalavai. So what is this? It keeps changing. So apparently, according to the Dutch, it was not always the Pradhani, but sometimes it was the Dalavai who was the most important guy. But there is more, because whenever there is a Pradhani at number 2, there's no Dalavai at all. Same here. If there's a Dalavai, there's no Pradhani. And all the time it's like this. So to me this gives the idea, okay, you have the Dalavai and the Pradhani. They're always competing. And it's a very fierce competition, because if one of them is dominant, the other one is powerless. That's what you would guess from this, right? Of course it's only the Dutch interpretation, but that's what you would get. And then, what about the Raya son? There's one here, number 7. Poor guy, he only got a few gifts. He was not so important. And elsewhere, he is not mentioned at all. We have the regent of the lowlands, which is a kind of provincial governor. We have royal in-law, so someone who part of the royal family, deputy general. You find all kinds of other positions, apparently, who were also town governor, sort of the fort commander, Kilakar. So, all kinds of other people. Okay, let's go to this one. Distribution of gifts at Fusiensis to the bondsles of Tangier, and the Maratha rulers of Tangier. Also in order of value, this period. Again, 7 years. Here we also see interesting things. Of course, the kings always got most gifts. What about the rest? It's very mixed. It changes all the time. So, for instance, one thing you see, which is not so clear from secondary literature, is a very strong Persian Islamic influence. So you see someone who is Subadar, right, which is Persian for provincial governor. Kilada, which is the commander of the fort and the keeper of the fort. You also see Islamic names. Someone called Sayyid, someone called Imam Khan Hurush Sahib, Hussain Khan. So apparently, at this court, Muslims could also become quite powerful, and there was a very strong influence anyway on the names of the positions. Another thing is that this list also tells you that sometimes the Dutch really had no idea what was going on. Let's stress that. I'm not saying the Dutch, they know it all. Absolutely not. So sometimes they don't know what to call someone. So they just say governor. Yeah, what is governor? It doesn't tell you anything. Minister. What does it mean, minister? The best one is this one. They have this Dutch word. In Dutch, you call it albeschik. It's really difficult to translate, but it means someone who decides everything. So I translated it as ordain it all. The person who ordains it, the person who decides all. So apparently this was someone who had a lot of power, but to the Dutch it was not clear what function he had. Was it a Dalavai, Pradhani, was it anything else? They just call it albeschik, ordain it all. Number 2. And then the son of the ordained apparently was also really influential. And here, they don't call it albeschik, they call it supreme ordained all. So that was something that was extremely powerful, according to the Dutch. But what is official law? They don't mention. So this is also to show you that sometimes the Dutch also have no clue. Okay, probably this guy, Imam Khan Ulu Shahid, was very powerful. That's all we know from this. Okay, then the question is, okay, what kind of question? So what, do you trust this? I'm asking you. And if you say no, I'm not offended. And it's really no problem. You think this is a good source for power relations at the court? Who thinks it's a good source? Raise your hand. Only two. Who thinks it's a bad source? Raise your hand. No one. Okay, so the Dutch still won. Okay, I know it's a difficult question. What I can tell you is, and of course I might have told you earlier, but I'm going to tell you now. Every time the Dutch arrived at the court with their gifts, and they had decided, okay, we give this to this person, that to that person, someone from the court, a lower courtier, would come to them and inspect the gifts. Okay, so what did you bring? What are you going to give to which person? And they would check it. Because there were always complaints. The courts always complained about the gifts. Not special enough, not expensive enough. Hey, you are giving me this, but last year you gave my neighbor king the same gift, so why do I get the same gift? Am I not special? You know, always complaints. Gifts were not given quickly enough, but there was usually no complaint about the distribution. So in few cases, the inspector would say, hey, listen, Dutchman, maybe you should not give so much to this person because he has nothing to say anymore. You better give more to that person because he can help you. So then the Dutch would change it. But usually there were no complaints about the distribution. So in a way, again, you find the local voice, the Indian voice, reflected in here. Because the distribution was sort of controlled, checked by someone from the court. So perhaps you can say that the distribution of power, according to the Dutch, was quite accurate. Not complete, of course. There were many people at the court the Dutch would never meet or didn't know about. So this is a very incomplete picture. But what it tells you, I think at least, is that the balance of power could change all the time. And that if you were a Dalavai, it doesn't mean you're the most powerful person. It doesn't depend on your function, it depends on other things. Maybe network, ambitions, connections, right? So that's what I can deduct from this. And again, you don't have to agree, but it's my interpretation. So in this case, the Indian sources and the Dutch sources are partly contradictory, but also complementary. They tell you extra things. So you do find the Dalavai, you do find the Prahlad, but there's more to say about it, according to me. Okay. Next topic, third topic, about court ritual and ceremony, court protocol. So how to behave, how to be nice. So if I come here, Professor Shaji will introduce me, you will clap your hands. It's just to show respect, you know, and make sure that we are all happy. That's why you have rituals. So you have them at the courts. Now, there are lots of Indian texts that prescribe how to behave at court. One is the Sanskrit treatise, Mana Solasa, from the 12th century, composed by one of the Chalukya kings of Kalyani in northern Karnataka. It's a text in Sanskrit, it tells you exactly in the audience hall, where the king is, who has to do what. Do you have to stand? Are you allowed to sit? Can you come close to the king or you have to stay away? What do you have to say? When do you have to bow? All the rules are there. It's so detailed that the historian Daoud Ali, I don't know if you know him, fantastic work he does, in his book Court Culture and Political Life in Early Medieval India, he could draw an exact map of the audience hall based on this text. And he can tell exactly where everyone was supposed to sit. So Here you have the king on the lion throne. He is here. And then you have swordsmen, women. Of course, you have the whisk bearer and the betel bearer, all these classical functions standing near the king. And then here you have a priest, no doubt the Brahmin, princess. Here you have the ministers. And here you have the lords of the provinces, so lower people. And so all they are distributed very precisely. And so here, priest, princess, counselors, companions, so these are the most of the courtiers, etc. So you have all these details. So this tells you how it should go, right? It's a normative text. It prescribes court behavior. But my question is, okay, these are the rules. How did it actually go? Did everyone follow the rules? And if you did not follow the rules, what happened? And
Punishment?
perhaps. And if you didn't follow the rules, was it intentionally, deliberately, or was it just a mistake? I find it very interesting. How to break the rules and why to break the rules. So, of course, the Dutch, with all their embassies to the court, they also experienced this court protocol, right? And did they try to adapt? What happened? Okay, so the Dutch sources can't tell you much about court protocol in practice. And the example I've chosen is protocol at the court of the Setupatis of Ramnat. And why that kingdom? Because if there was one kingdom with whom the Dutch were always fighting, it is Ramnat. It's my favorite court because there were always problems. And if you have problems, you have more sources. So that's good. Now, what you see on the left is a mural in the Ramnat Palace. Any one of you has been to Ramnat? Near Rameshwaram? No? Its palace is still there. It has beautiful murals. And it shows you the king, the Setupati king. So from 1720 showing Mutu Vijaya Raghunatha Setupati with courtiers on and beside the cart. So this is the king, Setupati, with the crown prince. And you see this man, he is allowed to sit with the Setupati on the carpet. This guy has to stand. And so here you see, in this mural, you actually see the same as here, right? It's all about who can be where and what kind of behavior is allowed. Now, so the carpet is important here. Now, on the right side, you have a small part of a diary of a VOC, embassy to Ramnat, 1743. It also mentions carpets all the time. Here is the word al-kataif, which is Arabic for carpet. And here it also says kleed, which is Dutch for carpet. So it was all about carpets. Now I'm going to read a small part because I want to make sure I tell it to you in the right way. Read you a small part about Dutch experience with carpets as part of the protocol in the audience hall. Okay, there we go. In 1736, the Dutch dispatched an embassy to Ramnat to discuss a trade-related conflict. When the Dutch ambassador appeared before the king signaled with his hand that the Dutch ambassador could sit down. However, no carpet had been spread out for the ambassador to sit on, even though this was a long-standing custom, as the ambassador himself remarked in his report. The ambassador was therefore forced to put down a carpet of his own, which he had actually brought along to place the gifts for the king on. So there was no carpet, but he had a carpet for the gift for the king. Okay, so he put it down and I will sit on that carpet myself. It's already embarrassing. It's like I have to present, but there is no laptop, right? Then I'm like, okay, now what should I do? So after this meeting, the Ramnat court denied the Dutch ambassador another traditional honor, as no courtier accompanied him back to his lodging. It's like you didn't pick me up this morning. You go, oh, we will see you at the university, bye. During an intermediate visit by some officials from the court, the Dutch ambassador expressed his amazement about the way he was treated, especially the absence of a carpet. But the courtiers assured him the ambassador would be appropriately received at the following audience. When the Dutch ambassador secured his second audience with the Setupati king, however, there was again no carpet for him to sit on, and he once more had to use his own carpet. The Dutch ambassador now became furious about this lack of respect and let the court know that next time that Ramnat would send ambassadors to the Dutch, because there were also counter embassies, they should bring their own chairs. During the subsequent Dutch embassy in Ramnat in 1743, so that's this one, when again there were commercial disagreements, the Ramnat court employed similar tactics in the audience hall to show its irritations. This time, however, the Dutch ambassadors had clearly prepared themselves. After the appearance of the ambassadors before the Setupati king and his invitation to sit down, once again, no separate carpet had been put down for them. Instead, another very large carpet on which most Ramnat courtiers were seated was rolled out a little bit more for the ambassadors to sit on. But that's not a special honor, right? Like, oh, we just roll it out a bit more, and oh, you can sit there. You want a special carpet for yourself, like you're an ambassador. But in what seems to have been some sort of counter-humiliation, the Dutch ambassador placed a carpet of his own, especially brought for this purpose, on top of the courtiers' carpet. Then he sat down, greeted the king on behalf of the company's governor, asked the king about his state of health, and presented his gifts. Undeterred by this action, however, neither the king nor his courtiers returned the compliments. So what's going on here? Yeah, you.
Is that the reason why, one of the reasons why the Dutch emissaries were not allowed to sit on the carpet? One is the caste thing. Indian courts are
No.
certainly,
Yeah.
it's a concept of purity and pollution. Certainly they do not belong to the political folder.
It's a very good suggestion, but many times they were allowed to sit on the carpet. And I told you, even shake hands with the king. So that's not the reason. Because usually they can sit on the carpet. Sometimes they can even sit next to the king on a couch. No problem. Why this time?
Only one particular time, or like you mentioned that more than 3 times they were not allowed to use the
Yeah.
carpet, and they were given a separate carpet, because carpets are something which you cannot wash, or they must have did the purification ceremony ritual after that.
Yeah, but
We
don't
do not know.
don't forget the Setupatis were not Brahmins or Kshatriyas.
See,
Shudras.
not necessarily. They need not have to be Brahmin or Kshatriya to be Brahmanical.
Yeah.
There is a code, when a code tried to project its legitimacy, which is certainly through the Brahmanical temple in pre-modern context, pre-colonial context, like I don't know whether we are calling this time period as pre-colonials because we do have very strong presence of the colonial powers in the area, in the subcontinent,
Yeah.
very prominent, predominant. But still, that time, these states actually do draw their legitimacy via the Brahmanical temple and Brahmanical rituals. They don't need to be necessarily Brahmanic, Brahmin or Kshatriya. Because many of the kingdoms, many of these rulers are not Kshatriyas.
Yeah.
They are it's Brahmanical oligarchy. So they go through a process of Hiranyagarbha to become Kshatriya, to be in the power.
Yeah. No, true.
So
But I think it's a good suggestion. I mean,
yeah, we
I
do
can't.
not know actually, but this
Yeah.
would be one of the.
All I can do is compare it to many other Dutch embassies, to Ramnat, to other courts where usually they were allowed to sit on the carpet. So this seems to be an exception. These two embassies. So my idea is that protocol is deliberately broken to show anger because this was in a time when the Dutch and Ramnat had conflicts, commercial conflicts. So the Ramnat court wanted to make sure to the Dutch, we're not happy with you. You know, okay, you can come to our court, but we're not going to treat you in a respectful way. So deliberately we will not put a carpet there for you. Deliberately we will not bring you back to your lodging. They did all kinds of other things. One time the Dutch went to Ramnat. I think it was one of these trips also. There was again a conflict. And then they knew that the lodging which the court will put up for the Dutch could be really bad, also to offend them. So first they sent someone to the capital, like, hey, you should check our lodging. So that guy came back to the Dutch, who were halfway, and they said, oh, the lodging is terrible. It's full of cockroaches and all that. We don't want to stay there. So then the Dutch said to the court, if you don't make a better lodging, we will not come. Okay, so they prepared another lodging, which was okay. So the Dutch went there and thought, oh, nice lodging, we're gonna stay here. But then that lodging was right next to the gate of the fort, of the Setupati, and on top of the fort they had put a very big gun directly aimed at the Dutch lodging. So again, it was a message like, okay, you have nice lodging, but we're still watching you with our gun. So it was full of showing disrespect, using protocol or breaking protocol. But that's my theory. You don't have to agree, but what I want to tell with this story is that, so you have the rules, and I would love, I mean, if you don't agree, great, tell me, because I'm also not certain, it's just my interpretation. But you have the rules, and the Indian sources tell you much about the rules, right? The treatises, the shastras, how to do it, what are the rules. But how did it work in practice? And there you find that the rules are often broken, deliberately, to show anger. And it happens two ways. So the Dutch sometimes also go to the court and they don't bring gifts, deliberately. It's the worst thing you can do. You don't bring gifts, but it's a strong signal. There are also embassies to Ramnat where Ramnat had not been very nice to the Dutch and they feel guilty and they want to make up for it. And they even ask the Dutch, okay, we want to be nice to you now. Please tell us exactly how you want to be received. And then the Dutch say, okay, we want 2 double rows of soldiers in the court, and then we want this, and we want so many carpets, and we want all this. Because they know it means respect. And then the court will do exactly what they ask. So it's a constant game. But that's my interpretation. But I would love if you publish something and go against me, because that will sharpen my argument. But so the point I'm trying to make here is that it's another case where Dutch and Indian records are complementary. So the Indian records tell you the rules, and the Dutch records tell you the practice. Well, I mean, very basically.
So when you say that Indian records, what kind of records are you using? It's about chronicles?
Well, for this topic, yeah. So for this topic, I use these treatises. There are more than just the Mana Solasa. There are also other, but of course I can give you only one example here. But there are many more texts that describe the rules at the palace.
Predominantly Sanskritic texts.
No, also in Kannada, Tamil, Telugu. Yeah, all sorts of texts. How it should go, and also these visual sources, I think are very useful source, because it also shows you sort of the ideal situation. I think you're not convinced, but that's okay. Yeah. So what for me is striking is that, okay, I read the Mana Solasa, it gives me a certain impression, and then I read the Dutch records, it gives me a very different impression. How can I bring it together?
Is there any reference in any of the Sanskritic traditions or vernacular literature, that is Kannada, Telugu, or other languages, referring to the foreign travelers and how the foreign traders and travelers being treated within these courts?
That's a very good
Do you have
question.
any,
I never came across. I would love to have a source from Ramnat or any course about the behavior of the Dutch. It would be perfect for me. And what is their interpretation? It would be so interesting, but it doesn't exist.
Because many of the inscriptional records might have, I'm not sure about Madasolas or whether it has some mentioned any implications within the text. If you break certain rules within the code, you will be committing as the sin of killing your own mother and taking father and killing your own mother and patricide and killing the teacher, etc.
Yeah.
So, does Madasolas refer to certain implications?
Okay, I should check it again. I don't have that ready. I know you have sometimes references like that. Yeah, but it's more about like very serious things, not so much about okay, what if you don't bring a gift, or what if you don't put the carpet there, you know? So for me, it's these little things in the protocol that were used as an extra way to show the other party how you feel.
Because this is a 12th century text, Madasolas.
Yeah, true.
And you're talking
Yeah.
about 18th century,
Yeah.
17th century and 18th century.
Right. You're very critical, which is really good. But what I can tell you is that there's also an early 18th century Sanskrit text from Ikari, which even admits it is partly based on the Manasolasa. So actually I looked at a whole range of texts, but I have no time here to mention all of them. But if you put them all, there's even a 19th century text, the Shukraniti, I think. You see the same thing in all these texts. So this is sort of a regular South Indian thing that continues over the centuries. Yeah, that's why I feel it's okay to use the Manasolasa, but true.
I have a thing for that because Manasolasa is a text could be perfectly, which is a prescriptive text.
Yeah.
How a court should be functioning.
Exactly.
And Laudali's work on that is, he takes it to a different level altogether.
Yeah.
Laudali, he talks about the commissars in the court and etc., how their behavior should be and what is the constitution of the court, etc.
Yeah.
But if you can find any implications in the text, like if someone breaks the rules of the code, there is a possibility of there be these implications given in the inscriptions as well.
Yeah.
You will be considered as someone who killed the father and married the mother.
Yeah.
Or you will be considered as killing your guru or your teacher.
Exactly.
So those kind and consider it is called the Mahabharata, the great sins.
Yeah. The thing is,
So
you know.
that also means it is not real threats. If you do that, you lose your membership to the entire community.
Yeah.
And you lose your caste status as well. So thereby you lose your inheritance. So these are elaborate. If you can find such references in Manasolasa in terms of how the court should be conducted and the severe nature of the implications given in it. So based on that you can read it. But again, my question is, this is a 12th century text.
Yeah. No. The thing. So you. I think you also read Daud Ali's book.
Yeah.
The thing is that basically he talks about even an earlier period, and he talks about the whole of India. So he uses all these 5, 6, 7, 8th century Sanskrit texts from North India, where you find such references. But I didn't want to use those because I felt it is too far removed from my area. Only in Daud Ali's book, the Manasolasa, I felt comfortable to use it because I know that later South Indian texts directly refer to the Manasolasa. So it was still a relevant text in my age. Yeah, so you are right. I mean, if I can find relevant descriptions of what happens if you break the rules, it would be really interesting. But I couldn't find. Yeah, but it's very good points, and I'll keep it in mind because I would like to do the same for Kerala. What are the rules? What was the practice? Yeah. So
So in Video Pundesh, మీరు Delhi Sultanate as well. Balman's court manners, these are so highly put into practice in a very, very strict manner. So, even though we have no clear evidence about what is the treatment they have made towards the indigenous people or something, the court manners, the paibos, or a kind of this customs parties when the king enters into the court.
Yeah.
Somebody has to wash his hands,
Yeah.
legs, and all these things. This kind of court manners. This is probably not only in the Indian people, but also from Persia also they have some kind of manners which has been imported in India,
Yeah.
and it has been introduced to this state.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so my point here was basically, so this is another case where the Indian records and the Dutch records are complementary, I think. They tell you different things about the same topic. I think I've been talking quite long, so the fourth part I think I will skip. It's the least interesting one because that's where the Dutch sources and the Indian sources totally agree. It's about the kind of royal titles that rulers use, and what you find is that so the Vijayanagara emperors use very long titles because they're real emperors, and then you have the Nayakas who keep considering themselves subordinate to the Vijayanagara emperors, even though Vijayanagara doesn't exist anymore. So the titles are very limited. And then finally you have the Setupatis of Ramnad who claim they're actually very unimportant, but they claim they're very important. So they have the longest titles of everyone. And you see that same pattern in Indian sources and Dutch sources. So it was a way of, it was one example where the sources agree. But I will skip that because I think it's really too long. So I go to this image now. Because I want to round off. But first I want to say, what I think really works well is if you combine Indian sources and Dutch sources. So this is also an invitation to work together, because you can read Malayalam, I can read Dutch. If we can work together, if you can use the Malayalam source, I can use the Dutch sources, it might be really fruitful. And I hope that my examples have shown you how that can work. And so this is something we like to stimulate. And because if you bring them together, they complement each other, they contradict each other, they can confirm each other, but they always have a certain relationship and they put each other into context. So you learn more about both the local sources and the Indian sources. Okay, well, I'm going to end. I think I've been talking long enough. Almost 2 hours? Yeah, 2 hours, my God, I'm so sorry. But it's also because there were some good questions. I hope you have some idea now of the Dutch sources, how they are structured, how they are organized, what kind of documents there are, what kind of information you find, and how the information relates to Indian sources. I hope I also have made you maybe more enthusiastic or curious to explore them. Again, I want to emphasize, most of these documents are unexplored. Most of the work still has to be done, because no one in the world knows Dutch. So, yeah, if you're willing to learn Dutch, you really have a lot of options. I want to show you these 3 guidebooks. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were published from Manohar in Delhi. 3 guidebooks called Dutch Sources on South Asia. It's a sort of overview of all the material that is there. I contributed myself to these volumes. This one deals with the National Archives in the Netherlands. This one deals with other organizations in the Netherlands. And this one deals with Dutch sources on South Asia outside the Netherlands. So for instance, it includes descriptions of the material in Tamil Nadu archives in Chennai. Finally, the thing I want to say is that there is a program coming up called Cosmos Malabaricus. Recently there was a new news item in the Hindu because there was an agreement signed between the Kerala Council of Historical Research and Leiden University to organize a program for students from Kerala to come to the Netherlands for 1.5 years, do an MA. It doesn't matter if you already have an MA or even a PhD, but still you can come to the Netherlands, do an MA there, and what you will learn in 1.5 years is Dutch, all Dutch handwriting, how the archives work, how to interpret these materials. We hope to start the program already this summer, so that means July 1st, which is really soon. So very soon there will be an advertisement for this program. If you're interested, make sure you keep your eyes open. You can apply. We will have 2 in the first year, 2 in the second year, and 2 in the third year. So in total, we want to have 6 historians from Kerala coming to the Netherlands, learn Dutch, and work with these records. So you're all invited to apply. I cannot promise you will get it. We don't know how much interest there will be, but yeah, we hope that, let's say, well, what is it? 5 years from now, there will be 6 Kerala historians that can work with these records and combine them, of course, with Malayalam records. So, if you're interested in this program and you want to be updated, just send me an email. It's just my name, lennartbes@gmail.com. So it's super easy. If you're interested, send me an email and just tell me, please keep me updated with the program. Then I'll make sure you will see the invitation to apply. And then you can apply. And we actually hope by late February to have made the selection. So that's pretty soon. But almost welcome to apply. You're always free to contact me anyway. If you have more questions, most welcome. So then, nothing else but to thank you, Nani. Is that how you have to say it?